the wheat and the barley, which are the 7 species that Israel is known for. Those are the greatest fruits, the big 7, the greatest fruits in the land of Israel. The Torah has a special mitzvah called Bikurim. The first fruits have to be brought to the Beit HaMikdash. The whole procedure. Bring to the Beit HaMikdash, you give it to the Kohen, and there's a whole, you have to read Psukim, you have to give thanks to Hashem. There's a whole procession regarding the Bikurim, the first fruits in the Beit HaMikdash. So now we are discussing the...
Good morning, Rabbi.
Morning. So we're still here. We have another Gemara discussing. There's a mitzvah. The Torah talks about placing the first fruits in front of the mizbeach. When you come and you bring the first fruit to the Beit HaMikdash, you need to place it in front of the mizbeach, in front of the altar. And there's another mitzvah that you have to go ahead and read Psukim. You have to go ahead and say your appreciation to Hashem for coming to the land of Israel. We had the difficulties in Egypt. God took us out of Egypt, like we say in Haggadah Shel Pesach. You know, we talk about our past, our history, and our present modern day miracles, so to speak, that we're here in the Holy Land. That is what we do by the Bikurim. So now the Gemara of Omer of Sheshet. We are Omer of Sheshet. It's about, in the Hebrew, it's about 5 lines from the top. And in the English, it's like we said, 19a, 1 on the bottom. Omer of Sheshet. Bikurim dehanacha. The placing in front of the Mizbeach, ma'akevet behem. That will hold you back from fulfilling the Kohen is not allowed to eat the Bikurim, the first fruits, unless it was placed in front of the Mizbeach. And we suggested that the placing in front of the Mizbeach of the first fruits is symbolic of giving it to Hashem. Because if who you're really giving the Bikurim to, who are you really giving your appreciation? You're bringing the first fruits to Hashem to recognize that Hashem is the one who gave you the land, just like we have the mitzvah called Shemitah, the 7th year. You need to go ahead and show you don't work the land during the 7th year. Why don't you work the land during the 7th year? Hashem ha'aretz. It's a Shabbat. You need to show and recognize and remember not to forget that the land belongs to Hashem. So the Bikurim is also about remembering that God gave us the land and the fruits. Therefore, we place it in front of the Mizbeach to say like we're giving it to Hashem. And then what happens afterwards is that the Kohen keeps it. Hashem says, let one of my boys, give it for my boys. The Kohanim get it. But they're the ones that are going to actually eat from it, but really it's a gift to Hashem. Similarly, we saw maybe the Seforno, when certain Karbanot have the mitzvah of Tnufa. You actually wave it in different directions. The certain parts of, let's say, the Shlamim, you wave it up and down and all different sides, 6 directions. Also, the idea is really you're giving it to Hashem, but Hashem wants the Kohanim to eat that, eat certain parts, and therefore Hashem gives it to the Kohanim. The Kohanim are like eating off the table of Hashem. So that's a little bit the background in our Gemara. So comes Rav Sheshes, Rav Sheshes, Bikurim hanacha ma'akevet behem. The placing on the altar, before the altar, that will hold you back from fulfilling the mitzvah. However, the kriya ma'akevet, the reading of the psukim, that there's a mitzvah to read the psukim, that does not hold you back from fulfilling the mitzvah. You get the mitzvah even if you do not read the psukim. We said a beautiful idea from the Sefer HaChinuch. The Sefer HaChinuch said that when you express yourself, the point of reading the psukim is because it's not, when you express yourself, when you verbalize something, when you communicate something, it makes a different impression on you yourself. You get even inspired from what you say, and it brings you to a different place. So that's a little bit behind the reason for verbalizing. It's not enough to think it in your heart. So that's what we said. So now the Gemara says, how do we know that? The Gemara says, Kaman ki aitana. Rav Sheshet, his conclusion that the most important thing is the placing in front of the altar. He is following the following Tana, which is a Tana, the Tanya. We have a Braita. Good morning, Jaime.
Good morning, Rabbi.
We are on 19a, in the article 19A1, top right column. We are now we are explaining Rav Sheshet's law, that the most important thing, the thing that will allow the Kohanim to eat those first fruits, it's only the placing before the altar, the hanacha, placing the first fruits before the altar, and then the Kohanim taking it. That is, and the kriya, but the psukim, the reading of the psukim is secondary. It's not as important as the placing in front of the mizbeach. He's like the following Tana. Which Tana does he go like? The Tanya. We learned in the Breita. What does the Breita say? Rav Yossi Omer Shloshet Dvarim. Rav Yossi says three things, Mishum Shloshet Zekinim. He said three halachal. Rav Yossi said three halachot in the name of three different old, rabbis from the past. He quoted three different laws from three different rabbis, which means to say one law from each of these rabbis. And the Gemara is going to focus on only one of the three of the rabbi's statements. Rabbi Yishmael Omer. Here is the statement from one of Yehuda of what Rabbi Yishmael says. Rabbi Yishmael says, this is the quote of Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yishmael Omer. The Torah says that you bring the Ma'aseh Sheni to eat it l'fnei Hashem in Yerushalayim. You bring the Ma'aseh Sheni. Where do you eat the Ma'aseh Sheni? L'fnei Hashem, in front of Hashem. Now the question is, when does l'fnei Hashem, those words in front of Hashem, does those words mean specifically when you have the Beit HaMikdash, when there's the holy presence of Hashem, which is existing in the world, and the divine presence of in front of Hashem, when Hashem has the Beit HaMikdash around? Is that the time? Is that the only time that you bring the mitzvah Ma'aseh Sheni that we say you eat in Yerushalayim? Emphasizes it's l'fnei Hashem. It's in front of Hashem. So the question is, today, when there is no Beit HaMikdash, is that called l'fnei Hashem? Is that called in front of Hashem? Or that's not called? Is the l'fnei Hashem specific to the Beit HaMikdash? Or l'fnei Hashem would even mean even when there's no Beit HaMikdash? So that is the question. The question is, there's a destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. Do we say that the same law, the Torah has a special law of Ma'aseh Sheni, that Ma'aseh Sheni is the type that you have to separate from your crops, which you separate the first and second year of the cycle and the fourth and the fifth year of the cycle, 10% you have to go ahead and take to Yerushalayim and to eat to Yerushalayim. So the question is, does that apply in our days as well? That's the question. Morning, Mark.
Morning, Rabbi.
Morning. The question is, do we eat Ma'aseh Sheni today after the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash? Today, in our time, does the laws of Ma'aseh Sheni, is there an allowance to eat Ma'aseh Sheni? Do those laws apply today? Or is the laws of Ma'aseh Sheni that you eat Ma'aseh Sheni only in the time when you have the Beit HaMikdash? But when you don't have the Beit HaMikdash, you can't eat the Ma'aseh Sheni. That is the question of the Gemara. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yishmael says, V'dinu. We should be able to learn it out in a certain ma'atzinu. We could learn out, we have some other precedent, another situation that's similar to Ma'aseh Sheni, another law, and we're gonna look at the precedent that's that we find somewhere else, and then we'll be able to see. Let's see if we could apply what the ruling by the other item. We'll say most probably it applies here as well. So that's one of the things of the Torah is something called ma'atzinu. That's one of the ways, one of the 13 ways that the Torah is expounded. That if you find a precedent somewhere else, that we could try to apply that ruling in this case as well, unless you can make a distinction to say maybe it's only specific to that. There's a reason to say that it's only specific over there, but not over here. Like I give the example, If you find that an apple, you say a Borei Pri Eitz, an orange also you would say a Borei Pri Eitz, or a pear you would say Borei Pri Eitz. They both grow from the tree. So if you find a law somewhere, you should apply it somewhere else, unless there's a reason to make a distinction, right? The fact that you say a shehakol on apple juice, but you don't say a shehakol on grape juice. So we have to understand why, even though they're very similar. So that's the question over here in the Gemara. So the Gemara says, to answer our question, again, the question on the table is, Ma'aseh Sheni, the tithe, which is the second Ma'aseh Sheni that you separate. The first Ma'aseh Rishon is what you give to the Levi. That's the Ma'aseh Rishon, the first tithe that you separate. But Ma'aseh Sheni that you take to Yerushalayim, are you able to eat in Yerushalayim today? So the Gemara says, Dinu, B'chor ta'un havat makom. There's also a mitzvah to regarding B'chor, the firstborn animal that the Torah says you're supposed to give to the Kohen. And the Kohen, it belongs to the Kohen. It's a gift, one of the 24 gifts that go to the Kohanim. And it's a korban. Parts of the animal are brought on the Mizbeach, the sprinkling of the blood on the Mizbeach, on the altar. And the Kohen eats the B'chor, eats the firstborn. So B'chor is very similar to, and where is it eaten? In Yerushalayim. It's kosher halim, it's light, holy items. It's eaten in Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem. So we have something else on record that's supposed to be eaten in Yerushalayim. And what's the law? Ma b'chor tom havat makom. The firstborn animal needs to be brought to Yerushalayim and slaughtered there and brought on the Mizbeach on the altar and eaten in Yerushalayim. So ma b'chor eino ela b'fnei habayit. This allowance of bringing the korban, there's no altar. Once the Beit HaMikdash is destroyed, there's no altar to process the korban. There's no altar. You can't build your private altar and process the korban on the altar. There's no altar. So what do? They would give it to the Kohen, and the Kohen would wait until there would be a blemish. If the animal have a certain blemish, certain mum, and then the Kohen would eat it anywhere, just like because then he would be able to eat it anywhere. So we see by B'chor, we find the precedent that the firstborn that's supposed to be in Yerushalayim, we say that once the Beit HaMikdash is destroyed, you're not able to eat it anymore in Yerushalayim as a firstborn unless it has a blemish. So too, the Gemara says, Af Maaseh, also Maaseh Sheni, Eina Ela B'fnei Habayit. We should also say that Maaseh Sheni, that also is only be able to eat in only when you have the Beit HaMikdash. Meaning we have two laws, we're comparing them, we're saying this has to be in Jerusalem and that has to be in Jerusalem, and we say once the Beit HaMikdash is destroyed, the B'chor is not eaten, so too the Maaseh Sheni also cannot be eaten today in Jerusalem, just like we find that the firstborn can't be eaten in Jerusalem. So to that, there is a question on the comparison, the Gemara says. Because man lebechor shekein ta'un matan damim ve'imurim legabe mizbeach. The firstborn requires placing of blood and parts of the animal on an altar. See, the firstborn, maybe the reason why today you can't, there's the laws of the firstborn, you wouldn't apply the normal process and application of the law of the firstborn animal, is because you don't have the ability to process the offering today. You can't slaughter it and bring the blood on the altar. You can't bring parts on the altar. However, Maaseh Sheni, take the fruit to Yerushalayim and eat it. There's nothing stopping. What is stopping you? Okay, you don't have the Beit HaMikdash, but we don't know that that will stop you. The fact that you can't bring a Bechor, you can't bring a firstborn to Yerushalayim and eat in Yerushalayim in the way a firstborn is eaten nowadays, maybe because we have no possibility of doing it today, because we don't have an altar today. Good morning, everybody. But Maaseh Sheni is just, you know what? You take your wine, you take your grapes, you take your olives, you take your grain and eat it in Yerushalayim. So what? Maybe you should be. Maybe that's the question of the Gemara. Perhaps maybe you should be able to eat the Maaseh Sheni just to bring everybody up to date. The question of the Gemara is: can a person, today's day and age, when the Beit HaMikdash is destroyed, can he eat the Maaseh Sheni in Yerushalayim? Is there any restriction that he can't be able to eat it? So the Gemara says, so comes Rabbi Yishmael, and he says, you know what? You're telling me, you want to show me, you want to suggest that the reason why Maaseh Sheni, the reason why you can't learn Maaseh Sheni from Bechor, the firstborn, you want to say, maybe the reason, Bechor, the reason why you can't eat it today in Yerushalayim in the normal status of a firstborn is because we have no Mizbeach, we have no altar. So to that, the Gemara says, Bikurim Yochichu. I'll show you the first fruits. What do we know about the first fruits? The first fruits of those 7 species also has a law that has to be in Yerushalayim. So we have 3 things on the table supposed to be in Yerushalayim: the Bechor, the firstborn animal; Maaseh Sheni, the tithe that you're supposed to bring to Yerushalayim; and the first fruits you give to the Kohen. The Kohen needs to eat in Yerushalayim. Now, the first fruits do not require, there's nothing that you sacrifice on the altar from the first fruits. You don't give the first fruits on the altar. You don't sacrifice parts of the first fruits. All of the first fruits go to the Kohen. And even though all of the first fruits go to the Kohen in general, and there's no part of the first fruits that actually is consumed on the altar, there's no sprinkling of blood by the first fruits, it's fruits. Nevertheless, what's the law by the first fruits? Today, when there's no Beit HaMikdash, the Kohanim do not eat the first fruits. The first fruits are only eaten when there is the Beit HaMikdash. So what do we see? It's not because today, because we don't have an altar, that's what's stopping something. It's not the altar that's stopping. We see it's the lack of the Beit HaMikdash is stopping. Because Bikurim, which has no issue of sacrifice on an altar, nevertheless, the first fruits are not, you don't eat them in Yerushalayim today. So the Gemara is saying, so therefore we should say the same thing by Maaseh Sheni. You got the steps of the Gemara? Let me clarify the steps of the Gemara. Step 1, step 2, step 3. Okay? I think we have 3 steps in the Gemara. Okay? We're going to explain it. Step 1 is the Gemara wants to learn Maaseh Sheni nowadays. The tithe that you need to take to Yerushalayim, you the owner, you separate from your crops and you bring to Jerusalem and you eat in Yerushalayim a certain amount of fruits, a certain amount of produce. Does that law apply today as well? Today in 2023 or 5783, do you have that mitzvah? Are you able to eat Maaseh Sheni? And as Rashi says, you need to separate the Maaseh Sheni. This rabbi holds the holiness of the land remains. Eretz Yisrael is holy today as well. And because it's holy, the laws that applied when you had the temple, the Beit HaMikdash, apply today also. That means you need to separate those produce. It's required to separate the 10%. or else you'll have a problem. But you have that mitzvah of separating the 10%. You have a problem of eating the rest of the fruits if you don't separate the 10%. You need to separate 10%. But the question is, but can you eat the 10% that you separated? Can you eat in Yerushalayim like it used to be that when there was a Beit HaMikdash, you would eat in Yerushalayim? That is the question of the Gemara. Can I separate? I'm going to separate my Maaseh Sheni. I'm going to separate, Rashi says, my Masrot. But the question is, can I eat in Yerushalayim today? Like when the Beit HaMikdash was around. So also we have to think about the fact of what we're missing today. Morning, Mark. We don't have that today, right? We're not, the fact is, no, we don't eat the Maaseh Sheni today in Yerushalayim. We don't eat first fruits today in Yerushalayim. We don't have all those things. We don't have the Bechor. We don't have all the Karbanot. We're missing a lot by not having the Beit HaMikdash. We need to recognize what some of the things that we're missing. So that was step one of the Gemara. Just bringing Mark. Mark, you heard the whole, you've been on. Yes, I'm sorry if I didn't, maybe I mixed up. Aaron was on and then you went on, so it's hard to see. It says, okay. So we have, step one was the Gemara wanted to learn Maaseh Sheni from Bechor, from the firstborn. Just like the firstborn, the Gemara says, you don't eat today in Yerushalayim. So too, Maaseh Sheni, you don't eat in Yerushalayim. So the Gemara to that, the Gemara says you can't compare it. Maybe the firstborn, the reason why you can't eat it is because why? You don't have no mizbeach, no altar. But here, where you don't require an altar for Maaseh Sheni, maybe you should be able to eat it. To that, the Gemara says, I'll show you something else that doesn't require consumption on an altar, and still you can't eat it. So that's what. So therefore, so too over here, we should say it doesn't need consumption on the altar, and you should not be able to eat it. So to that, the Gemara says, Bikurim yochichu. Bikurim. Good morning, Mr. Silverman.
Good morning, Rabbi.
We are on Yutet Amud Aleph, 19a, and in the art scroll we're on 19a, A1. So the Gemara says, Bikurim yochichu. We find from the first fruits. The first fruits, they're not able to go ahead. They don't require any placing. There's no placing, consuming the first fruits on the altar. They're not consumed on the altar. And nevertheless, we said they're not eaten only, the only time you bring the first fruits is only when the Beit HaMikdash is around. So the Gemara says, so too we should say, Maaseh Sheni also should not be able to be eaten in Yerushalayim since there's no Beit HaMikdash. So to that, the Gemara, again, you got it? The Gemara says there's no Beit HaMikdash, so therefore you should not be able to eat the Maaseh Sheni, just like the Bikurim are not able to be eaten today because there's no Beit HaMikdash. Okay, so Bikurim is specifically the 7 fruits of Israel. You have to give. Maaseh Sheni is right. It's not specific to those 7 fruits, but Maaseh Sheni, and we have to see there's Maaseh Sheni on Torah level and Maaseh Sheni on rabbinic. Certain produce is biblical. Certain now on a Torah level, by the way, it's not on everything. It's more rabbinic. The rabbis included more things. But like when a lot of the Maasrot, the Torah Rashis, the Gamchat, Pirosh Chav, Yitzarecha, a lot of the biblical maaseh that we find in the Torah is on your grain, on your wheat, and on your wine, your grapes, your olives. That seems to be those are the 3. Those are a few of the grain, the wheat, and the olives and the grapes. So now, good morning, Mr. Son. Good to see you. Yes, Baruch Hashem. So the Gemara says like this. The Gemara wanted to compare the first fruits to Maaseh Sheni of today, okay? Just to bring everybody up to date. Today, the Gemara's question was, we don't have the Beit HaMikdash. You need to separate from your wheat, you need to separate from your olives, you need to separate from your grapes, you need to separate a certain 10%. And in the old days, when you would separate those 10%, certain years of the cycle, the first and second year and fourth and fifth year of the cycle, you would bring that to your Jerusalem and you would eat in Jerusalem. You and your kids would eat in Jerusalem. The question is, today we have no Beit HaMikdash, no temple. We're going to have to separate it. We have to separate because the land is still holy, even though there's no temple. But the question is, can we eat it in So what do you do? So what they do with it, they're going to redeem it onto a coin. And once you redeem it onto a coin, as the Torah says, you can redeem Maaseh Sheni. Then once you redeem it onto a coin, then the produce is able to be eaten. Now the holiness is on the coin. And then we're going to see that the law is that today we don't spend. Today we just we don't spend it. But they don't do the next transfer. They don't buy foods with it. They at the end of it, they let the coin rot. They throw it. Maybe they throw it into the ocean. They don't use it. It's not used. They don't use the money. No. So that's what's happening today in Yerushalayim. By the way, you go. No, but they don't need. In today's day and age, you don't need to redeem it for the true value. In today's day and age, you can redeem it even much less than almost not, very, very little. That's why, by the way, when you go to Israel, you have to be careful where you go buy you go to a market, a market that's just, that's not most of the stores, if you're in religious neighborhoods, real religious neighborhoods, they did the type thing. But if you go to a place, you go to a farm or something, a non-religious place, and they have fruits that grew there. No, who took off the fruit? Off the Ma'aseh, and not religious Israelis did not take off. Right for Arabs, there will be issues of but buying fruits from them. You would have because they might not have the power to remove the sanctity from the land. The fact that they might own certain parts of the land. So therefore, there are issues. You have to be careful when you go to Israel, depending where you're staying. Obviously, if you're staying in a nice hotel with proper hashgacha, they took care of everything. You don't have to worry about it.
There's a lot of halachot regarding this. They have to Ama Aretz, if he did avodah zarah, do we take it or not? There's a lot of halachot regarding this.
Right. So therefore, you have to just know. You have to be aware. When you're in Israel, where are you going? If you're traveling somewhere, a secular farm or something, there's issues. It's the fruit. You say it's a fruit. It's not meat. Still, it's a fruit. There's laws of halachot on the Ma'aseh. So the Gemara says, wants to compare the first fruits today, that the Kohanim, the first fruits are not eaten today in Yerushalayim. So too, the Gemara says, we want to say Maaseh Sheni today should not be able to be eaten in Yerushalayim. So the Gemara says you can't compare. Why can't you compare? Mali bikurim shekain tu'inim hanacha. The first fruits, maybe the reason why we say that the first fruits, those laws of eating in Yerushalayim by the Kohen of the first fruits don't apply today, is because one of the key elements of the first fruits was you needed a mizbeach. You needed to place the first fruits in front of the altar. When you would come to the Beit HaMikdash, you would place it in front of the mizbeach. That's bikurim. So maybe that's why today it doesn't apply. But Maaseh Sheni, when there's no placing in front of the altar, maybe today, maybe it should apply. So you can't tell me, the Gemara says, you want to tell me you found by first fruits, you don't eat in Yerushalayim today, the Kohanim. So too, we should say the same law should apply. Maaseh Sheni cannot be in Yerushalayim. So the Gemara shoots back. Maybe the reason why the first fruits are not eaten by the Kohanim in Yerushalayim is because you're missing a key element. That's a key element, like we said, the Kohanim will not be able to eat the first fruits unless it was placed. This opinion says you have to place it in front of the altar. There's no altar today. When the Beit HaMikdash is destroyed, there's no altar to place it in front of. But Maaseh Sheni, you don't require an altar for Maaseh Sheni. So maybe that type that you're supposed to eat in Jerusalem, maybe you should be able to eat in Jerusalem today. That's what the Gemara shoots back. To that, the Gemara says, so he continues, the rabbi continues, Talmud Loma, therefore we have a hekesh. We have a source from the Torah itself that teaches us that Maaseh Sheni will not be eaten in Jerusalem today. That you would separate the Maaseh Sheni, you would separate it, but you cannot take the actual crop that grew in the first year and the second year of the Shemitah cycle, meaning you have Shemitah, then you have the first and second year following it. You have to take 10% to Jerusalem. You will not, I have a teaching from the Torah itself that it does not apply today. What is the teaching? Based on something called a hekesh. What's a hekesh? Hekesh is the Torah, when the Torah groups certain things together. When you group something together, the Torah is grouping it for a purpose, to compare the law that applies here, applies over there. We got our lawyer over here, right? He'll tell us about when you group things together in a group, what's the significance of grouping things together? So one of the things is when the Torah puts things together, so sometimes, many times, the Torah teaches us, puts things together to teach us certain laws. There's a famous hekesh called by marriage and divorce. The Torah puts, the guy gets divorced, and then it says the yotza v'hoista, and then he gets married to somebody else. So he warmed up the seat for you, Mr. Haber. He was keeping it warm. He wanted to bring more continual holiness to the seat. She gets divorced, and then she goes to somebody else. So the Torah compares divorce to marriage. So what's the comparison over there? So one of the things the Gemara says is just like a person gets divorced with a document, there's a get, divorce is done through a document. So there's a possibility to marry a woman through a document, with a certain document that the document states, I'm marrying you with this document. We don't marry a woman today with a document. We marry a woman giving her a ring. That's how we get married to her. The ketubah is a marriage contract. It's just a marriage, the responsibility of the husband. But you're not marrying her. You're not creating the marriage through the giving of the ketubah, right, through the shtar. That's not our custom today. The marriage takes effect the moment man says to his wife, Hariyat Mukadeshit, you're married to me with this ring, and then she accepts it, she puts her finger out to accept it, and it's done in front of two witnesses, that means that's the first step of marriage. The second step is the chuppah, but that's the first step of marriage. But that's a comparison. The Torah did not compare divorce to marriage for no reason. There are certain laws that we learn from each other by the fact that the Torah compared them to each other. So too the Gemara says over here, Talmud Loma, V'achalta lifnei Hashem. The pasuk says you need to eat in front of Hashem in the place that Hashem has chosen in Jerusalem. It talks about Maaseh degoncha. The Torah says that you have to eat your Maaseh, the Masrot, meaning the Maaseh Sheni, that you have to, the tithe you have to eat in Yerushalayim. And it also says in the same pasuk, in the next word, it says, B'chorot b'korcha. Also, the firstborn of your animal, when you would give it to the Kohen, the firstborn animal, the Kohen needs to eat it in Jerusalem. They're side by side. So the Torah puts the firstborn and connects the firstborn to the laws of Maaseh Sheni. So that's what the Gemara says. Why did the Torah connect the dots? What's the reason why it's grouped together? To teach us that the law that applies over there applies here. The Gemara says, Makish Maaseh l'Bechor. The Torah is comparing, you got that, Mr. Haber? The Torah, by grouping something together, is comparing them. Ma Bechor eina ela lifnei habayit. Just like the firstborn is only the laws of eating the firstborn is only when you have a Beit HaMikdash. There's no laws of eating the firstborn animal today. When you have no Beit HaMikdash to process the offering, so too, Af Maaseh, so too, the laws of Maaseh Sheni, that you separate the 10%, is only the eating of that Maaseh Sheni would only be Eina Ela Lifnei Habayit. It has to be only when you have the Beit HaMikdash. So that is the statement. This is the Braita of Rabbi Yossi. And now the Gemara says, it's a very interesting Braita. This Braita is of the opinion, Masa Sheni, today, when you separate Masa, you can't eat it in Jerusalem. So why did the Gemara bring this Braita? To shed light on a different discussion that we had. From this Braita, we could answer our question that we had. What was the rabbi said that it's the most important thing about the Bikurim, it has to be placed in front of the altar. That's what he said. But the reading of the Psukim, there's two mitzvot that are by the first fruits. You have to place it in front of the altar, one law, morning. Another law is you have to read Psukim. Those are two independent laws. But which law is the key? Which law is the best? So the Gemara says the placing. And how do we place it? And we see it from this Braita. How do we see it from the Braita? So look at the Gemara, how the Gemara infers from analyzing this statement that we just said will shed light on our discussion. Because the imita, if it is true that Rabbi Yishmael will hold that the reading of the Psukim is the key, so he should have said, he should have said, you can't compare the two. He should say, Malay Bikurim shekain tu'unin kriya v'hanacha. Bikurim require the reading of the Psukim and the placing in front of the Mizbeach. Meaning, when he wanted to say there's a difference between Maaseh Sheni and the Bikurim, what did he want to say is the difference? He said the difference is Maaseh Sheni does not require placing in front of the Mizbeach, but the Bikurim require placing in front of the Mizbeach. But he could have said a different thing. He could have said, he could have said, Bikurim, you can't compare the two, is because Bikurim require reading of the Psukim in front of the Mizbeach, and this, in the Maaseh Sheni, does not require reading of the Psukim in front of a Mizbeach. So why didn't he use the point? Why did he only focus on the fact that Bikurim require the placing in front of the Mizbeach? Why didn't he say that Bikurim require the reading of the Psukim in front of the Mizbeach? It would seem to indicate that the reading of the Psukim is not so vital like the place, and therefore he didn't use that as the point of using that as the difference. He only used the point of placing in front of the Mizbeach as the difference. So that's what the Gemara. It's part of the. I think that it sounds like he places it there, and then he says a lot of most of the Psukim are said after he places it there. If there's no temple, there's no placing, and also there's no temple, there's no reading of the Psukim over there. So the fact that we didn't emphasize the reading of the Psukim seems to indicate that that's not such a vital, that's not the key battery. So that's what, so the Gemara says, and the point is, the reading of the Psukim, by the way, it's interesting. We know you place the fruits in front of the altar, but it's the reading of the Psukim also has to be read at that spot in front of the altar. So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi says, you know what? Even if you're correct that you don't need to go ahead and read the Psukim in order for the Kohen to eat the first fruits, even if you say that the reading of Psukim is not the most important thing, but mitzvah mileka, but there is a mitzvah. Isn't there a mitzvah? So lema mitzvah v'lifros. Why didn't he say that by the Bikurim there's a mitzvah to read Psukim? And here there's no mitzvah to read Psukim. It's true. Maybe the reading of the Psukim is not as strong as, meaning according to you, even I'm agreeing to you. You're saying that the reading of Psukim is not as important. But it's still, the Gemara should have stated that you still have this mitzvah. Certain mitzvot that you have to do, it can still go on without doing that mitzvah. Yeah. Was to compare it to Purim and to decide what is first, what is more important. Right. Or where they're put. The reason why they put it together, the Gemara just wanted to. We want to know about Matzah Sheni. Can you eat in Yerushalayim? That's why the Gemara. That's the point of that right there. But when you have it with people, two rabbis are discussing something, but you can figure something out from their discussion. So that's what the Gemara wanted to figure out by the fact that the rabbi only spoke about the fact that Bikurim require the placement, and he did not talk about the psukim, seems to indicate that the placing is the most important thing. That's all the Gemara. That's what
Rabbi,
that's again.
Rabbi, yeah. For Maaseh Sheni, isn't it the separating of it is the most important?
It's separate, but there's another point, Mr. Silverman. You have to eat in Yerushalayim. It's not enough to separate it. The question is, can even after you separate it nowadays, can you eat in Yerushalayim? That's the question. Okay, we're going to stop over here. I don't want people to be late. We should have a beautiful davening and a beautiful Shabbat. Thank you all for joining. And we should have the Beit HaMikdash come back. Amen. And we'll be able to eat the Bikurim in Yerushalayim and the Maaseh Sheni and everything else.
Amen. Thank you for teaching us, Rabbi.
Thank you for being on.
Thank you.
Thank you.